Well, we're going to the Middle East pretty soon, traveling again. But right now, joining us, former ambassador to the state of Qatar from the United States and a longtime foreign member of the U.S. Foreign Diplomatic Service Corps, now serves as senior advisor to the Gulf International Forum, Ambassador Patrick Theros. Ambassador, happy Easter. Great to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much, and the same to you. I hope this was a nice one for you.
It was fantastic. Actually, I took last week off. I had a wonderful week off. I come back, I'm re-energized and ready to go. And, of course, I said, when I get back, I've got to have the ambassador on to catch me up on his thoughts and everything going on. So I appreciate, sir, you're taking the time to join us today. We had a lot to talk about. And I've also got a clip I'm going to play for you from Jared Kushner that I'm going to get your reaction to. So we're going to change it up a little bit. But let's start over Easter with a horror show in Sri Lanka. And now ISIS saying that they're responsible for it. Sir, what, in your opinion, happened there, and what are the next steps?
I think it's a consequence of ISIS losing the ground battle in Iraq and Syria. For them, the rallying cry was, we hold the caliphate, we hold this territory on the ground, and it got them lots of recruits. Once they've lost the territory, a lot of the recruits say, who am I going to go fight for? A lot of them want to go home. So they've got to keep the pot stirring. So they looked around, I suspect they looked around the world for a soft target. The number of Christians and Muslims in Sri Lanka is pretty small. I don't think either one of them is more than 3 or 4% of the population. Most of the people there are Buddhist and Hindu. So let's go find a place where no one would think we would do something like this. There was a small Islamist organization that no one was paying much attention to because they were so small and insignificant. And ISIS, which apparently still has a really considerable clandestine outfit, ginned these guys up. We have no idea so far who the suicide bombers were. There might have been Sri Lankans. There might have just been foreign Arabs come in. So this is the mistake of regarding ISIS as a military problem. ISIS is and always has been an intelligence and, in some cases, law enforcement problem. Only in the caliphate was it a military problem. This is a case where it's the CIA and the FBI and the State Department that could be working to chase these guys down, not the U.S. Armed Forces.
So how do you think this plays out, sir?
Well, first of all, I don't think Sri Lanka was really an important target for them. What it plays out is this is ISIS saying to the world, man, we can strike anywhere. And for them, this is a recruiting tool. It is also a tool, it's also a means to get people to overreact. Mm-hmm. At this point, the Sri Lankan authorities are probably going to sweep up as many people that they think are related to this, which means they're going to sweep up a lot of Muslims. Someone's going to get abused, someone's going to get tortured, someone's going to get hurt. And then ISIS has got even more of a recruiting tool.
So then the retaliation, the reaction, the consequence then boomerangs back to ISIS and becomes their way of recruitment through martyrdom.
That's correct. And, this man, we're out there, we are carrying the good fight.
Unbelievable. And you really, it's very difficult to stop because, as you said, Mr. Ambassador, so much of this is really covert, not overt, and clandestine. Not right. when ISIS had that large territory in the Caliphate in Syria and Iraq. It was very covert, right? You knew who they were, you knew where they were, you knew the territory they had, you knew what they were doing, and now they've been driven out, so they have to basically go underground.
Right, exactly.
All right, so
but they are underground, and what is out there now is very much a, this is how can I say? They always were underground. We didn't. We were fighting the visible part, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yes. So the snake pops his head up, and we try to chop the head off, but the body of the snake is still underground. That's
right.
Exactly. If I can make an analogy.
There's more than one snake.
That's the other issue. We're with a former ambassador to the state of Qatar for the United States, Patrick Theros. He is also a career U.S. diplomat, and I bet you didn't know that that Ambassador Theros has received 4 State Department Superior Honor Awards, not dating you, Mr. Ambassador, but 1967, 1983, 1986, and 1992 from the United States. Let's get, sir, to Afghanistan. Very quickly, it seems that negotiations with the Taliban and the U.S. and the Afghan government seem to be moving along at a faster pace than we thought from reports I've heard, some on the record and some off, and the president is very anxious to get our forces out of Afghanistan. But then some of the Afghan government concerned that if we do go out, that whatever deal is made is not going to be honored by the Taliban. How do you react to that?
It's a very serious problem. To me, the president, because he senses that there is a national mood that says we got to get out of these places, we don't want American troops there anymore, we're tired, this has been America's longest war, and it's not going anywhere, seems to be copying what Henry Kissinger did in Vietnam, is let the American deal with the Viet Cong, or the North Vietnamese, and then, we'll cover it up. It gives us a face-saving way out. It didn't work, of course, because we had that drama of the helicopters at the embassy. But it gives us a face-saving way out. And so I think this is a very similar problem. We are heading for the exit and trying to figure out a way to do it face-saving a way as possible. The problem is that the Viet Cong, the communists in Vietnam, probably had far more popular acceptance across the country than the Taliban do. The Taliban have strength in one ethnic group. There's other ethnic groups. You have the Iranians, the Pakistanis, the Indians, the Russians, the neighboring countries, all of which have interests. So even if the Taliban, first of all, we don't know what the nature of the deal is. All we know is what's been announced, in which the Taliban promised that they won't allow any terrorists into the country, they won't allow Al-Qaeda or ISIS into the country in return for us leaving. I don't believe that is the key issue, or that will be the key issue in the future. It isn't ISIS and the terrorists. It's, can the Taliban establish authority over the whole of the country?
Right. Because
that's basically what they're aiming at. And I think that's very questionable. And I think what we're going to see, I'm sort of going out on a limb here, but I think what we're going to see is a resurgence of the civil war that in Afghanistan that occurred after the Russians left in 1979. So I think we're going to go right back to that. The Taliban can't be defeated, but they can't win either. And I think the neighbors, the Iranians and the Russians, are determined not to let that happen. I think the Pakistanis want the Taliban to take over because they've always had a great deal of influence over them. So this is not going to play out well. The people who are really up in arms are Afghans who have recovered. Afghan women used to be some of the most sophisticated and educated women in that part of the world.
Right.
There's exiled Afghans all over the world. Mm-hmm. Someplace between the Russian invasion, the Civil War, and the Taliban, the right of Afghan women to have an education, to get ahead in life, was destroyed.
Right.
With the end of the Taliban, a lot of very, very smart people are, particularly among women, a lot of very smart women have resurfaced. Mm-hmm. And they are, they're not going to take this lying down. So if the Taliban try to reimpose the social constraints, women can't go to school, they all have to cover, et cetera, they're opening themselves up for we're opening this up for real trouble. I heard one guy, source in very high up in government, said, well, we're going to retain an air base on Bagram so that we can keep tabs on the Taliban. And I'll tell you, this guy was not a military guy. You can't retain a base in the middle of a hostile country, to use against the government of that country. So they had, a peace plan is possible, but if they don't engage the Afghan government, which is not all that well organized, I must admit, but if they don't engage the Afghan government, all we're doing is recreating the Afghan civil war without us being here. And, who knows? Internally in the United States, that may be perfectly fine, and people may be horrified. In the long term, it's not good for American interests because it shows us to be weak. But I think the average American voter is going to see, get thee behind me. Let's get this out. Let's just get out of here. So I think from the point of view of the average American voter, this works out pretty well. But it doesn't work out well, I think, in the long term for the country.
Well, I think,
especially for Afghanistan.
And I think that's what President Trump has to weigh. I mean, he has a desire. Yeah. Obviously, he promised his campaign to get out, and he's got a desire to get out of there. But he's also, we've seen the president when he sees facts, he's changed his mind, and I think, we saw that. We see his reluctance to abandon the Saudi effort in the Yemen civil war. He's not willing to do that. Although we campaigned and said that the first thing we should do is get out of the Yemeni civil war and not back the Saudi-UAE coalition. He's gotten the facts. He's concerned about Iranian influence in the area. He's concerned about a lot of things, so he's been hesitant on that. And we've seen this in President Trump. When given the facts, he'll take a sober look at them, and if not act on them, he'll wait until he gets more information. So we have seen this now in 2 years of his presidency. I would assume we're going to see the same thing in Afghanistan until he's comfortable there making a decision, even if it goes against his instincts. Yeah.
Though the problem is that once you start down a road,
right?
There are consequences.
Right. And that's Exactly.
And those consequences are something you have to undo.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with former ambassador to the state of Qatar, Ambassador Patrick Theros, long-term diplomat for the United States, a winner of 4 State Department Superior Honor Awards. Mr. Ambassador, let's get to Qatar for a minute, and still no ambassador. I mean, it's kind of amazing to me, a country that we have, the biggest basin, the biggest military base in the Middle East, still no ambassador, nothing, zero. We're 2 years into President Trump's term. Scott Taylor, former congressman, my congressman here in Southeast Virginia, good personal friend of mine, so that's my disclaimer, great guy. We thought he was going to be named as ambassador nominee, and then we didn't hear anything. Now we're hearing again from our sources in the State Department that his nomination might be back on the table, but we haven't seen that. What's the deal with this?
I honestly don't know. I mean, our system ain't working. It's a cascading effect. If you don't have senior people in these different offices, the presidential appointment staff, the senior ranks of the Foreign Service, the Department of State. The first, you need to have the assistant secretaries in place. You need to have several of the undersecretaries in place because these guys are simply overwhelmed, and acting doesn't cut it. I mean, you can have an acting person, but it doesn't cut it because an acting person doesn't have the authority of a Senate-confirmed appointee. So it's a cascading effect. And not to criticize the president too much, but, he's been he goes off on his own tangents, and I think that appointments is an issue for him that he really doesn't want to get into. This is Patrick Theros' personal, this is too much nitty-gritty. My personal opinion is he doesn't like nitty-gritty. He likes the big picture. And the nitty-gritty means he has to balance off all the guys who have done political favors for him, who want appointments, against the professionals who want appointments. And under Tillerson, you had 600 professionals quit. So you put it's sort of the perfect storm. You remember that movie?
Yes.
Where you got the professionals gone, you don't have appointees, you don't have the properly staffed presidential appointment staff office in the White House. You have a president who probably doesn't really like doing this very much, because it means somebody's got to call him and say, Donald, I'd really like that job as ambassador to Qatar, and he doesn't want to give him the job, but how do you say no to him? Mm-hmm. And this happens all the time. So I think it is just a function, or rather, it is a result of not having properly staffed the place in the first place, combined with not having properly staffed the administration earlier, and compounded by Tillerson's brief tour as Secretary of State, in which so many professionals left.
All right, because that was a disaster, because he didn't really get it, and he was trying to downsize it and run it like he was running the Exxon Corporation, which made no sense from day one, and so he cut all these people out. And now you have a vacuum where, Scott Taylor has been forwarded as a potential ambassador to Qatar, which would be a political appointee, which makes sense.
Right.
Former Navy SEAL, former congressman, been there, served in the area, served on the base, understands the region, understands the area, be a perfect nominee, but he can't move forward. Then we heard, well, it's dead. Then we heard, well, it's back on. And meantime, I talked to Scott Taylor, and he doesn't know anything that's going on. Meantime, he's considering running for U.S. Senate from Virginia. So the whole thing's a mess, but we need to get this done. All right, I've got a couple more minutes. Great perspective. I'm going to play a clip here by Jared Kushner, who doesn't do a lot of interviews. I know Jared, talked to him many times, doesn't like to do interviews, but here's Jared Kushner yesterday saying the administration has 4 priorities and goals in the Middle East. And I want to get your reaction to this. Kiara, cut 8.
We've done is we've worked with our allies very closely to figure out how do you push back on Iran's aggression. I mean, everywhere in the Middle East where you look, where there's terrorism, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's Hamas, they're all being funded by Iran, and they're trying to destabilize, chant death to America, death to Israel. The number 2 priority was to defeat ISIS, and I think you've seen that the president's really turned up the pressure, and we've now destroyed the physical caliphate and taken that land back. And then the 3rd priority was defeating the ideology of extremism, and I think we've worked very closely with the Saudis to try to figure out how do you clean out a lot of the poison that was being taught in the mosques, and I think that we are making more progress than people thought we would be able to do on winning the ideology. The 4th priority was the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and we've worked very hard on that for the last couple of years. And I think that you'll see what we'll put out in a couple months, and I think that hopefully it provides a framework to maybe break through a very, very difficult problem that's been plaguing that region for a very, very long time.
Reaction, Patrick Theros.
Well, on the question of ISIS now being defeated, I think my previous answer covered that.
Yes.
I think we've made Iran, Iran's a problem, don't get me wrong, but we've made Iran into a boogeyman. And it's a little bit like, I had a very good friend once who was a judge, and he said the worst sort of cases was where the prosecutor has decided who the guilty guy is, doesn't look at alternatives, and works full-time to get evidence against the person they're going after. And I think we've closed our eyes to larger problems than Iran. Mm-hmm. The idea that Iran supports Hamas is, if it does, it's purely tactical. Mm-hmm. Iran and Hamas have very little in common. Mm-hmm. Iran is a big country. Going after it the way they did, we've broken the international consensus we had going after it. So we need to step back. We need to step back and look at this better than what we've been doing. On cleaning out ideology, if he really believes that, I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
I agree with you there.
And finally, the peace process, They have a plan. I will give them credit. They have a plan. I don't know if it's going to work. The plan is we are going to give the Palestinians a settlement that will make them financially better off, make them raise their standard of living, but not give them anything on the political side. And they're going to give the Israelis complete control of security. Theoretically, this could work, treating the Palestinians like a colony of Israel, but a colony that is governed sort of intelligently and governed compassionately. The problem is that you have political forces in Palestine that will never accept a situation where they don't have the dignity of some sort of political independence, and Jerusalem plays a big role there. And on the Israeli side, you have the settler movement that is trying to get rid of the Palestinians in their entirety. So it will, if the plan is as Jared laid it out, one of the things that's going to happen is that the Israeli government is going to have to come down with a ton of bricks on the settlers because the settlers will never buy it. And it also requires that the financial incentives to the Palestinians, the business, the ability to do business, the ability to farm, move, freedom of movement, stuff like that, is going to have to be a very large incentive. And that's going to cost a lot of money. Now, we've already spending a lot of money in that part of the world, so that may not be important. But it's going to be a heavy lift. And it will require as I say, it will require the Israelis to make some very hard decisions. Can Netanyahu, with a government that is dependent on pro-settler parties to stay in power, come down on him and say, okay, you're going to have to give up your dream of an Israel without any non-Israelis in it? So I don't know how this is going to work. So I rather think that Jared may be well-meaning. I think, like a lot of inexperienced people, he brings simple solutions to very, very complicated problems.
I don't see it being a viable plan.
No, I don't either.
I mean, having interviewed the chief Palestinian negotiator to President Abbas, getting his reaction to not this in particular, but just the state of affairs in Palestine, the fact that they would go for anything that didn't give them. And I think you summed it up here, Mr. Ambassador. This is why I love having you on. Without the dignity of sovereignty, is just never going to fly. It's just never going to fly. Exactly. And as you said too, I mean, you're right again. Looks great on paper, but just not going to fly. It's kind of like, let's nominate Scott Taylor for ambassador to Qatar. Great move on paper, but like here we are, and there's no nomination. So, sounds good, looks good, but hopefully the Taylor thing will happen. I don't see this being a viable plan. But the president can go in 2020 and say, he attempted something. I guess they can get that out of it, but I don't see that happening, and I think you're spot on. But I am out of time, sir. I want to thank Ambassador.
Well, it's always a pleasure, John. Thanks a lot for having me.
No, I love having you on, and I just have to. I know I've told you this before, and you're probably like, yeah, John, whatever. But I look forward to you having you on, and you teach me so much every time you're on. Your knowledge and perspective is incredible, as well as your independent analysis of the situation, sir. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.
All right. John Fredericks Radio Network.